You know, far too often, Africa gets painted as this isolated, static continent, a place that somehow just didn't have a history before outsiders arrived. But as we're going to see today, nothing could be further from the truth. In this explainer, we are digging into the undeniable archaeological and historical records that completely flip that narrative. Africa isn't just a chapter in human history, it is the dynamic wellspring of global civilization itself. So let's dive right in. Here is our roadmap for the journey today. We'll start with the cradle of humanity, move into the dawn of culture, explore the rise of the Nile, meet the Black Pharaohs, check out Iron and the Knock, and finally, look at the queen who defied Rome. All right, starting right at the beginning. Section 1, the cradle of humanity, the Rift Valley Crucible. When you really look at the sheer, staggering scale of our prehistory, it's just mind-blowing. Think about Africa's Great Rift Valley. It's this massive 3,000-mile geological fault, stretching all the way from Ethiopia down to Malawi, and it basically acted like a giant environmental chemistry lab for our species. Homo sapiens, anatomically modern humans, us, evolved right here, roughly 200,000 years ago. Back in 1997, heavy rains in Ethiopia actually washed out a nearly complete human skull dating back 160,000 years. Scientists named it Idaltu, which means firstborn, and the wild part? Its face and brain case look exactly like ours today. We stayed, we evolved, and it wasn't until around 80,000 years ago that the massive migration out of Africa finally kicked off.
And this timeline points to a pretty profound shared genetic reality. Geneticists have actually figured out that every single person alive today shares a common direct maternal ancestor. She's known as mitochondrial Eve. She lived right in this region of Africa around 200,000 years ago, and her mitochondrial DNA survived in this unbroken, continuous chain straight down to you, me, and everyone else on the planet. So, what does this all mean? It means our genetic differences are literally just skin deep. At our very roots, no matter what we might look like today, all of us descended from black ancestors in Africa.
Moving right along to Section 2, the dawn of culture, the spark of brilliance.
Okay, this is where we transition from just basic biological survival to true, undeniable cognitive brilliance. For the longest time, we've been told this myth that the earliest examples of human artistic expression were in places like the Lascaux caves in France, right? Those are about 35,000 years old. But actually, scratch that. In 1991, archaeologists uncovered the Blombos Cave in South Africa. Inside, they found these small ochre blocks dating back over 77,000 years, and they were covered in these incredibly deliberate hash mark etchings. They even found a literal painting kit where ochre was ground down and mixed with water. Guys, this wasn't just about surviving the elements. This was symbolic meaning. It was group identity. It's the birthplace of a rich cultural heritage tens of thousands of years before humans ever stepped foot outside of Africa.
Now let's fast forward a bit to about 10,000 years ago. Deep in the Libyan desert, there's a place called the Cave of Swimmers. Now, I know it's hard to wrap your head around, because today the Sahara is just this vast, barren ocean of sand dunes. But 10,000 years ago, it was a lush, vibrant, green savanna. We're talking lakes, hippos, giraffes, the whole shebang. And the rock art left behind there shows humans not just swimming, but taking the radical, game-changing step of domesticating cattle. This green Sahara was a thriving cradle of early civilization.
Which brings us to Section 3, Rise of the Nile, a new path for civilization.
So, by about 4000 BC, a brutal climate shift happens. It turns that beautiful green savanna into the harsh desert we know today, and that forced a massive human migration toward the fertile Nile Valley. As people packed in, society became incredibly complex. You had dedicated food producers, specialized artisans crafting amazing prestige goods, like these long, beautifully carved afrocombs that archaeologists have found still perfectly placed in the hair of 6,000-year-old pit burials. But all this concentrated power brings us to a really massive question. Where did the world's first written language begin? I mean, we almost always hear it was in Mesopotamia, right? Modern-day Iraq and Syria.
Well, the actual truth was sitting in a royal tomb in Abydos, about 300 miles south of Cairo. It belonged to an early ruler known as the Scorpion King. Archaeologists found 150 small ivory tags there, dating all the way back to 3250 BC. These little tags had holes drilled in them so they could be tied to boxes or bags of goods. And here's the kicker. They weren't just decorative art. They were the world's absolute first writing. It was a formative stage of hieroglyphs used as an elite property identification system. And this totally independent development in Africa predates fully developed cuneiform in Mesopotamia.
And that incredible organizational mastery
It reached its absolute zenith with the Great Pyramid of Giza. Built around 2600 BC for Pharaoh Khufu, this thing required 2.3 million stone blocks. And let me put that into perspective. Each of those blocks weighed an average of 2.5 tons. It literally remained the tallest building on Earth for 4,000 years. And by the way, we really need to bust a popular myth here. This purely African marvel was not built by slave labor. It was built using incredibly advanced mathematics by conscripted Egyptian farmers. The state organized them to build the pyramid during the Nile's flood season, when the river was too high for them to work their fields.
Let's head south for Section 4, the Black Pharaohs, Kings of the Southern Nile.
So, while Egypt was dominating the north, another major superpower was rapidly growing down in the south. And what followed was a 2,000-year relationship full of intense intimacy, but also bitter rivalry. You have Egypt in the northern Nile, and the Kingdom of Kush centered at Kerma in the southern Nile, which is modern-day Sudan. Now, Egypt was absolutely obsessed with the afterlife, and they desperately needed the vast gold mines of Kush to fund it, because they literally believed gold was the skin of the gods. But Kush wasn't just some resource hub for Egypt to exploit. It was a massively complex, beautifully planned city with a population of over 10,000 by 2500 BC, and they fiercely protected their borders with their renowned, incredibly deadly archers. But this rivalry came to a very bloody head around 1500 BC, when the Egyptian pharaoh Thutmose violently sacked Kerma. He reportedly even strapped the body of the fallen Nubian king to the front of his ship as a trophy.
For about 400 years after that, Kush struggled under Egyptian rule and forced cultural assimilation. They even adopted the Egyptian god Amun as their own. But by 750 BC, Egypt had fractured and become weak, and this opened the door for a brilliant Kushite king named Paye. Viewing his own people as the true, pure champions of the god Amun, Paye essentially launched a massive holy war to conquer Egypt. He famously declared, and I love this quote, "I shall let Egypt taste the taste of my fingers." He ordered his powerful army to purify themselves in the river, and then he successfully marched north.
That absolutely triumphant campaign gave rise to the 25th dynasty. The tables had completely, 100% turned. The Kushites, who were once the conquered, were now the conquerors. They reunited a fragmented Egypt and established an empire stretching from Meroe in the deep south all the way up to the Mediterranean delta. They created a stable, thriving empire that was actually larger than any territory Egypt itself had ever ruled before. These were the legendary Black Pharaohs of the Nile.
Shifting gears a bit, here is Section 5, Iron and the Knock, Independent Innovation. We are pivoting away from the monumental empires of the Nile for a second, and we're looking at Central Africa, 1500 BC. I want you to lock this date in your head. For a very long time, the global academic consensus was that ironworking was discovered in Turkey around this time, and that sub-Saharan Africa couldn't possibly have figured it out independently. But recent evidence has proven that exactly around this same time, small communities of craftspeople in Central Africa were stoking furnaces to fire ceramics. And, working with the incredibly unique lateritic African soil, they discovered iron as a byproduct. It's a massive paradigm shift. Africans didn't sit around waiting for outside influence or an instruction manual from the north. They were forging advanced new technologies directly out of their own local experiences.
And parallel to this incredible technological leap in ironworking, we see a massive leap in artistic legacy too. Discovered in modern-day Nigeria, the Nok terracottas date back to around 900 BC. These are the absolute earliest sculptural artworks found anywhere in Africa outside of Egypt, and they are stunning. They feature incredibly intricate hairstyles and heavy detailed ceremonial jewelry. They were clearly crafted by highly skilled, possibly even traveling professional artists. This proves we aren't just looking at a society that was barely surviving, we're looking at a society expressing a profound, sophisticated cultural identity.
All right, moving to our final section, Section 6, The Queen Who Defied Rome, the Climactic Stand.
We have made it to the climax of our historical journey today, jumping forward to the ancient world's ultimate superpower clash. By 31 BC, the Roman military machine had defeated Cleopatra and fully annexed Egypt. They were the undisputed, most powerful force in the ancient world. And now, they turned their sights southward, aiming directly at the Kingdom of Kush, which, by this point, was centered at the ironworking capital of Meroe. But Rome severely underestimated what they were walking into. They didn't anticipate the Kandakes. The Kandakes were these tremendously powerful, strategic, and deeply authoritative queens who ruled Kush, and the absolute most fearsome of them all was a one-eyed warrior queen named Amanirenas.
Queen Amanirenas didn't just sit back and defend her borders. She actually went on the offensive. For 5 grueling years, she led relentless tactical strikes right into Roman-controlled Egypt. During one of these raids, her forces actually captured a massive bronze bust of the Roman emperor himself, Augustus Caesar. And in an act of absolute legendary disrespect, she brought that head all the way back home and buried it right beneath the threshold of her grand temple. She made sure that every single person who walked into that temple would literally wipe their feet on the face of the Roman emperor. It was the ultimate ancient power move. Her relentless military tactics frustrated the Romans so much that it forced them to the negotiating table. She successfully brokered a peace treaty in 23 BC that secured Kushite independence for another 400 years. Nobody beat Rome like that.
And what's truly fascinating is that the Kushites actually recorded this epic victory themselves. They didn't just rely on the Romans to write the history books. They wrote it down using their own Meroitic script on a stone stela. Now, modern scholars have managed to decipher the alphabet, but the language itself still remains a total mystery. It's kind of like an English speaker looking at a text written in Polish. You can read the letters just fine, but unless it's a name or a specific place, you have no idea what it's actually saying. So this incredible ancient African written record of a victorious war against the Roman Empire is standing right in front of us, just waiting to be fully translated and understood. So, all of this leads us to one absolutely crucial question. How does knowing that Africa is the actual blueprint for art, technology, and civilization change your view of global history? I mean, from the literal genetic code in our very cells, to the first spark of symbolic art, to monumental engineering, independent ironworking, and warrior queens who literally brought the mighty Roman Empire to a standstill, Africa is the dynamic wellspring from which all human history flows. This is the true epic history of the continent, and it is just endlessly fascinating. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and remember, always keep questioning what you think you know about our shared human past. Catch you next time.